Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast is brought to you by Compassion International. For $38 a month, you can release a child from poverty. For more information, go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Consider releasing a child from poverty by sponsoring them through Compassion. Food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. It's the best $38 you'll spend every single month. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and sponsor a child today. Today in the podcast, we welcome Olympic gold medal winning wrestler Kyle Snyder to the show. Kyle might be the best wrestler in the world. He's the youngest wrestler ever to win the World Championship, the NCAA Championship, and an Olympic gold medal in the same year. A triple crown, really, of American wrestling that hasn't been accomplished in a generation. And he completed that sweep at the 2016 Rio Olympic Games. He ended his college career as the first and only wrestler to win the NCAA World and Olympic Championships as a collegiate athlete. He's a three-time NCAA National Champion, and he's the youngest Olympic gold medalist and the youngest world champion in American wrestling history. He's dominant. Let's just put it that way. In high school, he was 179-0 as a wrestler. In college, he was 75-5, and 4 of those 5 losses occurred in his freshman year. So you can do the math. He lost 1 match in his final 3 years as a collegiate wrestler. Kyle is a stud, but he's also an outspoken man of faith. And that's why I wanted to have him on this podcast and talk to him about success and talk to him about achievement and being the best that he can be, but not losing his identity and who he is and whose he is. So let's take a listen to the most decorated wrestler going right now. He is Kyle Snyder, Olympic gold medalist, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. Let's start with the 2019 Pan American Championships in Buenos Aires. That was the most recent, I think, event that has taken place. That was a big deal since in 2019, and since we're chatting here. You won a gold medal. You helped the U.S. win all 8 available gold medals, and it becomes the first time in history, I read, that a team has won every gold in a specific style at the Pan Am Championships. What was that like to be part of a collective effort in a sport that is so individual, I guess, where it's just you and the guy you're going with? What was that like?
Yeah, so typically, especially with wrestling, we're all training at different sites. You know, we wrestle at different colleges, and then when you make the senior level world team, you don't really spend too much time other than the summers at training camps and different stuff like that with each other. But this team, we've all kind of grown up together, and we're a lot closer than I would say maybe teams in the past. And so it's nice to be able to actually have that team aspect, similar to how you would feel in college, where you get excited when somebody does well and you feel like a real connection to their success because you've been training with them and helping them for a long time. And so it was cool for us to compete so well. There was a lot of good Pan American Championships are pretty tough. You know, Cuba, Canada, some of the other Pan American countries are pretty good, but everybody wrestled really well. So it's cool.
I presume that's a step towards Tokyo 2020 and being something that you're aiming for and looking forward to and trying to get that gold medal again. Yeah.
So the first thing is the 2019 World Championships, which are in Kazakhstan this year.
Okay.
So I'm actually wrestling in the trials June 15th. And it's a best 2 out of 3 match. I'll be wrestling one person. And if I win that, then I'll be competing in the 2019 World Championships. So I don't want to look too far ahead, but I mean, everybody is always looking at the Olympics because it's the biggest tournament. It's the one that holds the most prestige. So I'm excited to be competing well now, and the Olympic trials are going to be in April next year, so it's not really that far away, 11 months away.
Yeah.
So
where's the World Championships? You said it's in Kazakhstan. When is that?
When is that?
Yeah.
That's in September 15th through the 21st.
Okay.
So figure out who's on the team. June 15th, there'll be 10 of us, and then we'll train all summer, starting then, wrestle in a couple tournaments overseas, and then compete at the World Championships. And yep.
We don't have a ton of wrestlers on our podcast. You just said you'd be training all summer. Give me an idea. Give us, our audience, an idea of what that training consists of.
Yeah. So once you make the world team, the schedule is pretty regimented. I mean, I think there's maybe 14 or 15 weeks from when you make the team to when you compete at the World Championships, or something around there.
Yeah.
And I think 8 of the weeks I'm gone either overseas competing or at the Colorado Springs Olympic Training Center training for the World Championships. So there's a lot of traveling. And when I'm at the OTC, typically I'll lift 4 times in the morning. I'll wrestle. We'll wrestle pretty much every single morning and every single afternoon, other than maybe Saturday and Sunday. We'll have the afternoons off. But yeah, it's a lot of training, but I love training. I love working out, so it's no problem for me.
But what's that? What is in the training? Are you actually wrestling? Are you lifting weights? Are you doing? I don't even know. Are you doing cardio? Are you doing some kind of weird drills that nobody would think that would work, but you do that? Like, what does that entail?
A lot of guys do different things.
Okay.
My philosophy is I get in shape by wrestling. So I don't like running. I'm not too much of a biker. I like to lift and I like to wrestle. So those are the 2 things that I do. I just try to do them as hard as I can. But when we are wrestling, I mean, we're going, full out live. You know, we'll even wrestle simulation tournaments inside the room where the coaches will pair us up and they'll officiate the matches. And yeah.
Kyle Snyder is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You're a man of faith. I think it's a Bible right in front of you there, which I love.
Yeah, just making sure.
Just got to have it in case, right?
Uh-huh.
I love it. No, that's great. But why don't you tell us where that was rooted, where that took shape, and kind of how your faith journey came together, and maybe when Christ became real to you?
Yeah, so I think it started when I was a senior in high school. So I grew up in Maryland. In a pretty small town. And then I went to a private high school in Olney, Maryland, good counsel, for 3 years. And then for my senior year, I moved out to Colorado Springs, and I lived at the Olympic Training Center. And I was kind of like the guinea pig for this program that they're now doing, where they select athletes out of high school to come train and live at the Olympic Training Center for a year and complete their schooling. So I was out there, and both of my coaches, Coach Bill Zadek and Coach Brandon Slay, were really strong in their faith. And I grew up going to church and different stuff like that, but I didn't really care about it. All I cared about was sports and getting good enough grades so my parents would let me play sports. So
that's normal.
Right. So then I went out to the Olympic Training Center, and I really looked up to those guys. And they had both accomplished a lot of things in the sport of wrestling. They're Olympic champion, world champion. So whatever they told me to do, I was going to do. And then the first week I got there, they asked me to come to a Bible study that they had. So I started going to the Bible study, and I was like, if I'm going to go, I'll go with an open mind and try to learn as much as I can, because I don't really know anything. And I did. And I started to really enjoy it. I don't remember exactly what I enjoyed about it, but I was just like, man, there's actually a lot to learn about the Bible and about Jesus. And it doesn't seem as simple, maybe as just, I believe in Jesus, like people say that all the time, but there's a lot to actually learn and understand, and you can grow in wisdom and knowledge from just studying the Bible and learning from others. So I continued going to the studies, and it was a process for me. It wasn't like I went to the first study and then I was like, all right, now I'm fully committed, But I would say it took probably near the middle of my freshman year of college, and I continued to go on studies, and I continued to learn more and ask more questions. And I would say that's when I really committed my life to Christ, and my actions started falling in line with, as it says, to live in the Bible. And
Yeah. So a couple things coming into my mind here. First of all, I know just looking up and doing my research on your journey, you were 179-0 in high school, the 3 years that you were in Maryland, right? 179-0. So you hadn't even tasted defeat. You were that dominant as a wrestler. And so in my eyes, I'm thinking, well, this is a guy who sort of has it all. And it's a lot of times people don't come to Jesus or come to the Lord, or, have that come to Jesus moment, as the world might say, unless something bad is happening to them. So were you going through something that sort of geared you towards wanting to find out about God and kind of crying out to this Lord to kind of save you in that sense? Or was it because when you're on top of the world there, a lot of times that can get in the way. The success can get so big that you're just like, I don't need this God thing. Did you experience that at all? Yeah.
So for me, when I look back at my life and the success that I was able to have now and even up into before I was a believer, I look back and God brings people. God desires that all people come to Him, and He's working so that all people choose to love Him and choose to be His child. So for me, the path, even though I had a lot of success, I still, there was always something that I was chasing after. It wasn't enough, So I look back at my life and the type of success that I had at a young age. I think that God allowed me to have that success so that I could see that it doesn't really mean that much. There's always another kid coming up that's going to do something similar, or there's somebody else that's done something better already. And in 20 years, really no one's going to care too much anyways. So no matter what I do in the sport, it's not actually going to be my life. So I look back and I see, okay, I was able to do all these things, and God was showing me that it's not true life, but the only true life is Christ. And eventually my success ended up bringing me to the training center where I met, like I said, Brandon Slay and Bill Zadek, and they really introduced me to Jesus and really getting to know Him and have a relationship with Him. So He's doing I guess my path, maybe people would say, well, I wish I want that come to Jesus path, Sure. That one sounds nice. Yeah. But we don't know what we need, Only God knows what we need.
Yeah. So. There's a line in one of the songs I listen to, a Christian song. It says, how will they not know if they have never heard? And a lot of times it sounds like maybe you just didn't know because you hadn't really heard it in a way that you experienced it or heard it when you started to go to Bible study.
Yeah. For sure.
That's good. That's good. Kyle Snyder is here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. So let's talk about adversity, because you go 179-0. So when do you experience that first loss, and what was that like? And did faith come into play to help you deal, I guess, with that first loss in a way that maybe you couldn't have dealt with it otherwise?
Yeah, for sure. So my whole life, I wanted to be a 4-time NCAA college champion. So I had a pretty successful freshman year in college. I lost 3 times my freshman year, but even though I lost the match, I still had that hope of, I can still be a 4-time NCAA champ. It's not like I just lost a dual meet, but I can still win at the NCAAs when it really counts.
Right.
So then I made it to the NCAA finals my freshman year, and I was wrestling a guy from Iowa State, who I had wrestled during the season, and I was winning the match 1-0 in the second period, and I was in on his leg, and then he kind of got his leg out, threw me to my back right after that, and pinned me. So the match was over just like that. And that was pretty difficult for me. And when I think about adversity, losing a wrestling match seems very low on the
but it's your life in a lot of ways, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like thank the Lord, my family was healthy, and I didn't have any close friends that really died or relatives that died, and all these different tragic things that happened to me. The worst thing that's happened to me is losing a wrestling match. But
yeah, no, I hear you though.
Yeah. So then throughout that time period from my senior year of high school to then, I was growing in my faith. And my strength coach, who I look up to a ton, he has a really strong faith. His name's Neil Serafinas. And I was talking to him. I was really upset after the match, and I'm a pretty, happy dude. Like to talk a lot, but I was quiet. I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I wanted to just be by myself. And I remember talking to him on the phone, and he was like, well, you know what you got to do now, right? And I was like, no, I don't know. And he was like, well, I'll tell you what you got to do. You got to commit your life fully to Christ. And I was like, okay. So, and I knew what commitment was because I had competed at a high level in wrestling. So, and I could look at my walk with Christ and my level of commitment to wrestling, and wrestling was way, way higher than the way that I think about my faith. So I knew there was something wrong with that, but I just wasn't really willing to fix it. But then I think after that loss and after receiving guidance from my strength coach, I was like, yeah, why don't I try it? Why don't I start to think more about Christ and a little less about wrestling? And why don't I actually start to read the Bible? And why don't I actually start to pray and not just rely on other people to give me information? So I started doing that. And, I've just been maturing and growing ever since. And it's all God's work, not my work. And yeah.
Yeah, and then the next 3 years, okay, you weren't a 4-time NCAA champion, but you were a 3-time NCAA champion. So you were able to go and win the next 3 years at Ohio State. But I really want to focus on 2016 for you because that was a pretty good year for you. Lots of great things happening. You were just 20 years old. You won an NCAA National Championship, a World Championship, and then become the youngest American ever to win an Olympic gold medal in wrestling. Obviously a great year for you as far as being on the mat and as far as achievement goes. But what was that year like for you spiritually, I wonder? Like how did 2016 define you or refine you as a man of faith, not just with the success that you had on the mat?
Right. Yeah. So it was a great year wrestling, and it was also a great year spiritually. And I give a lot of that. Of course, all the credit goes to God, but also the people that he placed in my life. So there were 6 guys on the Olympic team, and we had 5 coaches. All 5 coaches were believers, really strong in their faith, and 5 out of the 6 guys on the team were believers, really strong and open in their faith. So it was like, even though I was competing and I was having a lot of success, I was surrounded by people who didn't value me because of my success.
That's good.
So it was easy for me to stay really grounded and continue to think about what was important, because that's what everybody was doing. If everybody was building me up and saying, oh, Kyle, you're so amazing, you're doing all these great things, I just want to be around you because you're winning all these matches, then maybe I would have fell into some of that stuff. But my parents and my training partners and coaches and teammates, they're all just like, man, God blessed you with a victory. Awesome. Praise the Lord. And that's great. Yeah. It wasn't like we celebrated, but it wasn't like anything crazy or anything for me to start feeling self-righteous about. So, but I did, one of the things that was weird for me that, so I would say in my freshman year is when I kind of fully understood what commitment to Christ was. But it was interesting. I would really study the Bible really hard before I competed. And then after I competed, I would kind of not read as much, not pray as much. Cause I was like, if I read really hard before I wrestle, then God will bless me with victories, Sure. Which is a crazy way to think. So, and I started realizing I was doing that. So then I had just continue to, if I was going to study hard before I wrestled, I want to study hard the next day and thank God and pray the day after that. Just always commit to him and always be thankful. So every year has been years of growth. And so every year's been great since then.
That 2016 year, though, I have to imagine increases the platform to a different level. Right? Your platform, people knowing who you are, people maybe inviting you to come and speak and share, and just opportunities to be a witness for the Lord. What was that like? What was that experience like, especially at such a young age, 20 years old, to suddenly see this platform increase? And were you able to recognize that to be a witness for Christ? Because sometimes I think we see this platform increase and people start pulling at you and everybody's praising you, and it's easy to kind of sway away from what's most important.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. So I the things that I'm really passionate about in life are, one, my faith in Christ, and two, wrestling, and three, I love speaking, and I've always loved speaking. So it kind of worked out well to where the more success that I had in wrestling, especially after the Olympics, the more and more people wanted to hear me talk about how I obtained this success and what was different in my life and what made it all possible and all these different things. And I made sure and made a conscious effort every time that I speak to make sure that I'm telling the truth about what the process was like. But at some point or another, I'm always giving all the glory and honor and praise to Christ, because that's what I believe is the truth. And I know that I could do nothing without him. So it definitely opened the door for me to not just winning the Olympics. Now you kind of transcend even sports, but people in the business world want to hear you talk. Yeah. Different sports teams want to hear you talk. People at the university want to hear you talk. So now it definitely opened it up so that I could speak to a much broader audience about Christ and about how he's worked in my life and my experiences with him. But I always say the most important thing that anyone can ever do is live it. So, you can speak about it all you want, but you're going to have a way bigger impact on people if you live it out. So when I'm at wrestling tournaments or in my day-to-day life, I'm at the grocery store or whatever I'm doing, I just want to make sure that Christ is first in my mind, so that if someone speaks to me, I can talk to them the way that Christ wants me to and act the way that he wants me to.
That's really good. And I know a couple years later, last year in 2018, the World Championships, you didn't win. You lost. And I watched a YouTube video on your post-game interview that you mentioned, and you said, I'm not defined by wins and losses. That was important for you. And I thought that was poignant, because that's a moment where maybe people are looking for a little chink in the armor, looking for a little dent. And it's like, okay, let's see where this faith really is for this guy. When he's on top, it's great. But when he just lost, and yet you stood up there, you fielded the questions, and you still pointed people back to Christ. Were you aware of that in that moment, what you were doing? Or did that just come natural to you?
I would say for the most part, it came natural. I mean, I knew that I've been watching sports my whole life, so I had seen interviews where people had won, they're super happy in the way they talk. And I'd seen interviews when people had lost, and that same person talking, and you could really see it in their face. And I don't want anybody to hide their emotions, because you put a lot of work into the sport. So I definitely understand if it impacts you a little bit, but the message that I preach and that I want to live by is that message that I said in the interview: whether I win or whether I lose, God controls the results. I just want to work as hard as I can and compete as hard as I can so that I can glorify him. And whether it's a win, I hope to glorify him, or if it's a loss, I hope to glorify him in the way that I wrestled and the way that I handled myself after the match. So, and again, I had a couple minutes after the match where I could kind of cool down and relax. And my coach, one of my best friends and training partners, Tavel Delagnev, he's got a really strong faith, and he's always says the right things to me at the right time. And he was just the year before, I wrestled that guy and I beat him, and in a pretty tough match. And he was laying in the back room all upset. His coaches were surrounding him, and I was cooling down. And now all the cameras are on him, and he was like, "Listen, that was you last year. Now you're in this situation. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't wrestle the match again. So let's just move forward." And I was like, "Man, good idea." So, and then we started joking around. So by the time I got to the interview, I was pretty much already over the loss.
No, that's good. Kyle Snyder is here on the podcast. A couple more questions with Kyle. Your Twitter page says you live by Philippians 1:27. Why that verse, and what does that book in the Bible and that verse in the Bible mean? Why does that mean so much to you, and how it has impacted your life?
So I love that verse. The book of Philippians is basically all about living as Christ lived. It's one of my favorite verses in that book is, "For me to live as Christ and to die is gain." Yeah. So it's like, man, if death is gain and living is Christ, then I know there's nothing I can gain in the world. So let me just live the way that Christ wants me to while I'm here. And then I'm going to be going to a better place. So I love the beginning of Philippians 1:27. It says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. And when I think about letting my life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, first thing I think is like, I'm not worthy.
Right.
There's no way I can be worthy of the gospel of Christ. I mean, that blows me away. But what a target, I think, to aspire or desire to reach is, no matter what situation you're in, no matter where you're at, no matter who you're with, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. And that's what I desire to do every single day.
I love that. What's your spiritual battles that you're going through? Maybe even your biggest spiritual battle that you kind of wrestle, no pun intended here, I guess, for lack of a better word, wrestle with on a consistent basis, maybe in the season of life that you're in right now. What's a spiritual battle that you're running through and trying to work through?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's things that are always being revealed to me, and I ask God to show me, how I can change. And sometimes it's small things. Sometimes it's the way that I talk around certain people. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I struggle with is judging others. So, somebody, whether they're a believer or not a believer, or they say they're a believer and they do something, and I'm quick to judge, and I want to be slower to judge, or I don't want to judge at all. I just want to chalk it up to that's where they're at in their life. And I just want to be there to help them, because I feel like when I judge them, I'm distancing myself from them. So I won't be able to have the same impact that Christ wants me to have. I'm kind of pushing myself away from them. And especially if I say something about it to someone else, now it looks like, okay, well, this guy doesn't care about these people, and he's not going to talk to them. And then if I ever do get the chance to talk to them, I've already said all these negative things. So I'm trying to get away from that, and more so just think about people as either they're believers or they have the potential to be believers, because that's the way that God looks at them. And I want to look at them at that way as well. And the other thing with sports is I understand that, and it's clear in my mind that my life is not wrestling, but still when it gets close to competition, or I'm about to wrestle in a match, I want to hold something back. I don't want to fully let go. I want to kind of, one of the things that I do is sometimes I'll protect instead of go out there and wrestle without fear. So one of the things I tell myself is don't protect anything. And what that means to me is that I'd remind myself, what it reminds myself is that God is in control of all of this. And I just want to work as hard, as smart as I possibly can, and leave it up to him what's going to happen in the future. So I don't want to, when I do protect things, I think it's because I'm finding some identity in who I am as a wrestler. And that could be, for other people, it could be who you are as a businessman, who you are as a teacher, who you are as whatever it is. And I don't want to find any of my identity in that. I just want to find it all in Christ. So those are a couple of things that, I'm trying to work through.
What does 15 years look like for you? I wonder, 'cause you can't wrestle forever, and you're obviously, you're going to be an evangelist forever. That's why I tell people, if they're believers, I said, you're going to be an evangelist wherever you are and whatever God points you to for the rest of your life. So what do you see in 15, 20 years? Is it coaching? Is it still being in the wrestling world? Is it the business world? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I personally, Lord willing, I'd love to wrestle for another 15 years. So I'm only 23 now, and 15 years, I'd be 38. One thing I think that would be really cool, I mean, we'll see what happens if God wants me to do it, is I'd love to wrestle in 5 Olympic Games. So my second one, if I make the team, I'll be 24. Third will be 28. Fourth will be 32, and fifth will be 36. So
there you go.
It's not Tom Brady, TB12's out there. He's 40 years old, crushing it. So
that's true.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what happens. But like you said, and I love that you say that you can't retire from being an evangelist, or you can't retire from being a Christian.
No.
You're one your whole life. So whatever I do, I'd love. And when I'm done wrestling, I'm sure that wrestling will always be a part of what I do and how I help people. But I love teaching and speaking as well. So doing something like that would be great.
That's awesome. Let me go a little lighthearted here as we wind down on the podcast. So I'm looking at your website or your Twitter page, and on your Twitter page mentions the website for, is it Rudis, Rudis? Yeah. And they have a Kyle Snyder apparel line, which was pretty awesome, with your own shoe. And obviously, listen, there's a lot of great accolades, gold medals, world championships, but having your own shoe has to be pretty cool. Where does that rank for you?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, you wear all the best wrestlers' shoes, and then growing up, you're like, man, I want a shoe for myself, or if I get a shoe, it'll look like this. It'll be so sweet. So, Rudis, they just started actually in the sport of wrestling like 4 or 5 years ago, and they've just been growing every year, and they came out with shoes last year, and I graduated from college last year and signed with them. And, they were committed to making a shoe, and they made a great shoe. So it was cool to be a part of that process. And it was something that I always thought would be really awesome growing up, being in the sport, and wearing other people's shoes, and now can wear my own. So it's pretty sweet.
Have you had that moment where a kid bought the shoe and took a picture and sent it to you that, hey, I'm wearing your shoe, Kyle?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
For sure. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, especially seeing like little kids at tournaments, like 5-year-old kids wearing the size ones, I'm just like, wow, crazy.
That is awesome. Last question here, Kyle. I really appreciate your time, and this has been a great conversation. We always ask this to all of our guests here on the podcast. We've done over 300 interviews here, so many, and every answer is different. I wonder for you what the answer would be. What is God teaching you right now? What are you learning from the Lord today in this season of life? We're taping this in early May 2019. What are you learning from God?
One of the things that God, I think, is just constantly reminding me of today is that in this season is that life is Christ. So not to find life in anything else that I'm doing, but just to find enough value in the fact that God has given you a spirit and it's dwelling inside of you, and He's created you. He created us to dwell in us, and that was the purpose of man from the beginning. So that's the revelation that I pray is clear in my mind, and that God's been showing me it more and more through His Word, and just to find value in that. And I think the second thing is that to find confidence in who God is, that God is love, and that God is sovereignly in control of everything. And when things don't seem to be going the correct way in my mind, or not going the way that I think they should go, the way I see it, just to know that God sees all things and sees the beginning and the end at the same time, and He's controlling it for my good. So to give up my point of view and to search for His.
It's really good. He is Kyle Snyder, 2016 Olympic gold medal winning wrestler, and just so much great things happening in Kyle's world, but most importantly, an outspoken follower of Christ. And it's been great talking to you, Kyle. Thanks for being here on the podcast, and we'll be following you, wishing you nothing but the best 2019, hopefully 2020 in Tokyo, and going forward from there. Thanks, man.
Yep. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Good
stuff there from Kyle Snyder, Olympic gold medal winning wrestler, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Give him a follow on Twitter at Snyder_man45. Snyder_man45. And he is a man, that's for sure, in his decorated wrestling career. And now the aim and the goal is to win the World Championships 2019. And he's got his trials coming up June 15th, and then the World Championships coming up in the fall, and then 2020, and looking ahead to the Tokyo Olympic Games and possibly winning another gold medal in wrestling. Many thanks to Kyle Snyder for being here on the podcast, and thanks to you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at sports_spectrum, and check out our website, sportspectrum.com. We have record numbers on the website, people checking out what we're doing there, and the articles, the content that's being released every single day. So thank you. If you go to that website every day, thank you. If you check out this podcast every time a new podcast is released, we also want to thank you. But check it out, sportspectrum.com, and it's a great opportunity for you to subscribe to our quarterly magazine, which is just $18 for an entire year. And the summer issue is coming out. So you don't want to miss that. You can subscribe today. Go to sportspectrum.com, click the subscribe button. Again, $18 for an entire year. It's a great deal. You get 4 quarterly issues plus a couple bonus magazines. You get around 6 issues a year. And it's a wonderful tool to give to someone, to tell them about Jesus through the lens and the stories of sports. Check it out, sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.